Hi there, Glocal citizens. Welcome back to the podcast that inspires a borderless mindset around manifesting a new world. I am your host, Florence Adu, coming to you from the Osu neighborhood in Accra. And I'm in a very special place because it really speaks to the person that I'm meeting today. As I walked in, there is a feeling of an exhibition, which I feel like is almost a family album is kind of the feeling of it, but we'll find out more about that in the conversation. So let me get right to her bio and then we'll move on into the conversation. She is a writer, filmmaker, and art historian. She is founder of the Anno Institute of Arts and Knowledge, through which she has pioneered a Pan-African cultural encyclopedia, a mobile museums project, and curated Ghana's first pavilion at the Venice Biennale. She published her first novel, The Godchild, in 2019, and in German in 2021. She has made award-winning films for museums such as the Tate Modern, Los Angeles County Museum of Art, or LACMA, I think they call it, and the New Museum in New York. She is the recipient of various awards and honors, having been named one of the Apollo 40 under 40, one of 50 African Trailblazers by the Africa Report, and a Quartz Africa Innovator in 2017, one of 12 African women making history in 2016, and one of 100 women of 2020 by OK Africa. In 2020, she was appointed to the Advisory Council of Oxford University's Cultural Program and was a principal investigator on the Action for Restitution to Africa program. She received the Ghana Woman of the Year Award in 2021, and in 2022, she was awarded the world's biggest history prize from the Dan David Foundation for outstanding early and mid-career scholarship and practitioners in the historical disciplines. Nana Oforiatta Ayim, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much.
Yay. So I'm so excited to have this conversation and just to kind of learn new things about someone that I've known for many, many years. And we've just sat down so very rarely. So it's nice to sit and be in the comfort of your space to have this conversation. So let's get started. Where are you from? Where are you local? And what is your craft?
I'm from Achim, specifically. Both my parents are from Achim. So that's my heritage. I was born in Germany. I'm in North Rhine-Westphalia.
Say that again.
In Rumenkaldenhausen and North Rhine-Westphalia.
Okay.
I grew up and then came back to Ghana as a baby with my mother for a couple of years and went back. And so my existence from a very early stage has been one of multiple localities. So yeah, that's Germany, Ghana, England, Russia, and then all the different places that I've lived, like Senegal, New York, Paris, Ethiopia for a bit. I've lived in many, many different places.
Okay, wonderful. And so where would you say you're local now?
Definitely Ghana.
Okay.
Accra and Ebwi is where I spend most of my time when I'm here. I am just trying out Portugal right now.
Mm-hmm. What part?
Lisbon.
Okay.
Which is, I'm working on my second book and I was looking for somewhere that I could write. And because when you, like people who write and do other things probably know, it's very, very hard to exist in your working life and carve out time for writing. Mm-hmm. And so the way that I wrote my first book was through writers' residencies, which are a blessing to creatives, all residencies. And in this case, I'm actually just kind of removing myself from my working environment or from my normal working environment. I have a lot of writer friends in Portugal, like Tai Selassie is there, a lot of Ghanaian friends.
Yeah.
And so we have a really beautiful writing community there. And then like I did this week, I come back for work projects that I have to do here.
Okay, got it. So interesting. And so what would you say is your craft?
My craft is storytelling, narrative building, I would say. Yeah, in different formats.
Okay. So tell us about how being born in Germany has or was sort of a launching pad for you to be this global citizen that you are?
I don't know if being born in Germany is the kind of the prerequisite, because Germany was quite a weird space.
Right. Okay.
I think it was the fact of coexisting in lots of different places.
Sure.
So I was born into a Ghanaian household in Germany,
Right.
which means I wasn't in Germany. I was in a Ghanaian Twi-speaking household in Germany. You know, Ghanaian eating, Ghanaian community,
Sure.
and then also coming back and forth from there to here, or there to here being Accra or Ghana. And then also England then came into my life at quite a young age when I went to school there. So I think in terms of being a global citizen, it's probably, I think if I'd been born and raised and stayed in Germany, I'm not sure I would be as much of a global citizen as I am. It's more the overlapping realities.
Ah, okay. That makes a lot of sense. And so you mentioned England as being a big part of so you were educated there for the most part, or?
In Germany and England. So I'd say about half.
Okay. And so coming from that Ghanaian family in Germany and being, I guess, kind of in that household, we all know that our parents like to steer us into these very technical or structured careers, and you're not that person. So how were you able to create that space for yourself in your studies and in your works?
I mean, I would say, first of all, thanks to my mother, who was a very independent-minded person and woman. And so she encouraged that spirit in me from a very young age, the spirit of being myself. I never kind of veered from the path of trying to find and be myself. And I feel like that's the most enormous privilege, to have a female role model, you know, that I knew from birth, who just kind of gave that space to me. I think it's a huge privilege, and I'm very, very, very grateful for it.
What did your mother do professionally?
She did lots of different things, and my parents split up when I was about 8. And so then she kind of, you know, fought her own way in the world. She was married several times as well. And so it was just that she was always like, I'm going to make the world fit me. Like, I'm not going to fit the world if I have to bend.
Sure.
I'm going to find space for who I am in the world.
Yeah.
Which could obviously veer into, you know, not selfishness.
I mean, you know, the word is typically narcissism or something, maybe.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Not even that strong, but just kind of like a disregard for the way the world is. And so I think it's kind of like, it's a kind of balance to strike, is to be aware of the ways of the world, but then also to hold space for oneself within those ways. It's quite a balance, I think.
It absolutely is. Absolutely. And that you say that, I reflecting on myself, and I'm like, that is what feminism is meant to be, right? So if we're these modern feminists, because I think about myself and I feel that is me, right? I understand the world, and I've, particularly in the last decade of my life, coming to Ghana and I don't want to say, I guess to some extent, reinventing myself as the creative that I've always known that I've been, but trying to kind of really start to get my footing as a creative person who is actually professionally paid for it. Then I fully understand that. So then how did your family find Germany?
Nkrumah scholarships, you know, that whole kind of wave of post-independence, go and get the golden fleece of education and come back and build our country. And then there were the coups, the series of coups, and my parents had young children at the time, and, you know, weren't going to come back into a series of coups and violence.
Right.
So that's the kind of common story, I think, of a lot of us who went there. But just to also finish the question that you asked about the parents and the expectations, there was a lot of anxiety on the parts of my parents when I branched out into, I mean, the interesting thing is when I went to university in England, it was still free. And so in a way, like my choice of what I studied was not contingent on my parents paying my university fees. And so I chose to do politics and Russian. And my mother was like, why is a Ghanaian girl going to study Russian and for what? And I was like, because I love it.
Yeah.
And if she had been paying my university fees at the time, or my father, if I might have had the same kind of freedom to choose something I love rather than something that was practical.
Sure.
I might have done law, even though I really didn't. Sure. But if they had been paying my school fees, I might have been coerced into doing it. But and this is like basically a kind of call for free education and the freedom that gives you to grow into who you want to be, rather than, having to feel like a lot of young people at the moment who start their lives in huge amounts of debt because of the amount of, student fees that they have to pay. But yeah, so there was that freedom. And then for the first 10 years of my career, I made no money. And so the constant focus, especially for my father, because, fathers are very connected with security and all of that. You have so many, so many degrees, so much intelligence, so much ability. Can you not go and kind of job in a bank? And I was like, do you know me? Do you know your own daughter? Right. Telling her to go and work in a bank. I was like, not on my, over my dead body. I would rather be destitute.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
So there was a lot of anxiety about whether and how I would find security in my life.
Yeah. Okay. And so that those first 10 years, you were probably in academia a little bit, doing research. And so when did you find the art?
I did a master's in African art history. I have to say art was always present.
Okay.
I mean, I remember things like I was in Germany, and this is what I mean about my mother. There was a Van Gogh exhibition in Holland, at the museum in Holland. And Germany, where I lived in Germany, was really close to the Dutch border. And I really I was obsessed with Van Gogh. I was like, painting that Starry Night over and over again.
Oh, wow.
And I was doing it as a school project. And I said to my mum, I really, really, really want to go and see this exhibition. And she got on a train with me and she came, even though it was so, I'll never forget that. It was so abstract to her, and her strange daughter who was obsessed with art house films and all of this thing, which was so not in her wheelhouse at all. And yet she did that for me. And I don't know, I think acts of faith and support like that from your parents, they stay with you. It's such a core memory for me that she took that time and the energy to do something that she had literally probably thought was the weirdest, craziest thing to do. But she did it for me.
Nice.
And I think parents putting that kind of faith in you and who you're trying to be in the world is so invaluable. And that's, the one thing I would say to all parents is, if you can support your child in their dreams, even if it's in such a small way as getting on a train with them to go to something that's important to them, that stays for the rest of their lives with them. But anyway, you were asking about art. I just wanted to say that even when I was at school, art was life-changing for me. It was transformative. I remember going to a Mondrian exhibition when I was about 15, and just seeing how this one artist had tried to translate the very nature of reality, not in its illusory form or even in form, but in its deepest form. And if you know Mondrian's work, it's like these blocks of color. Actually, that is so weird.
Oh my gosh, right.
I just looked down and I was like, okay.
There it is.
So yes, she's this is something that's actually really important to me, that art is everywhere and everything. So you guys can't see this, but the coasters that I have for my drinks are actually Mondrian paintings, which I didn't connect. So he was very, very formative in my love for art when I was about 15, because these blocks of color, he was trying to distill the very nature of reality. And he started off like basically doing the paintings of trees and landscapes and everything. And he was like, yeah, but this is the depiction of something. I want to get to the very essence of that tree. I want to get to the spirit of the tree. And he found that just by copying its form, he wasn't getting to the essence of what that tree was. Yeah. And so he became more and more abstract in his method and his medium, because he was trying to get to the very, very, very essence of what reality was. And I saw this at the age of 15, this journey of this person, and which was essentially a spiritual journey. Yeah. And I was like, wow. I think that was probably the kind of most defining moment of going into that exhibition and seeing that and having my mind blown and being forever transformed. Sure.
I would have never thought, I've seen Mondrian, but I never understood that it was an attempt to really distill art in a certain way that was its nature. And wow, you learned something new.
I mean, that's what I love about being an art historian or a cultural historian is, finding out the stories and the narratives and putting those together with the visual of, or whatever the creation is. Yeah.
Ah, interesting. Okay. So art was always present. Yeah. But then thinking about a career, right? How did you then decide, okay, I am this woman who is in the creative spaces, who loves art. How do I figure out how I'm going to make that money that I haven't been making?
Yeah, I mean, I have to be honest, that took me quite a long time. Yeah. I started off, my mum's side of the family is in politics. Yeah. And not just like contemporary politics, but also traditional politics. Mm-hmm. So my grandfather was, the king of Achimabuakwa. My great grandmother was a queen mother who'd become king. There was centuries of history of leadership. And I think what that did to me growing up, even as a baby, and I mean, if you believe, which I very strongly do, in the connection with your ancestors, I felt this sense of obligation from a very, very early age that I'm put on this earth for the sake of my country, for the sake of service, for the sake of giving back. Mm-hmm. And because of the kind of history of leadership, that for me was in the early years in the form of politics. And so for my whole childhood, I thought that was what I was going into, is politics. Yeah. And so I studied politics in Russia. And as soon as I graduated, I'd been working towards going to the United Nations. I had my path very clearly set out in my head. I was going to go to the United Nations. I was going to do the thing. And then I'd come back to Ghana and then I'd go into leadership. I mean, all of this, I had it very, very clearly set out in my mind. And then I went to United Nations. I'd been writing to them since the age of 15 or 16 or something. And I'd got this internship by lobbying them like a insane kind of A-type child that I was, being like, you must give me a place. Right. I must be there. And I got there. I was in the Eastern European section of the Department of Political Affairs at the time when Kofi Annan was still there. And I was on the 86th floor or something, which was literally a floor underneath. And it was like a hierarchy thing.
This is the UN in
New York. Yeah. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And so I was quite high up. And the Department of Political Affairs was, there's all these departments and there's hierarchies and all of this stuff. Yeah. And I was at the time writing all these reports on Chechnya and Nagorno-Karabakh, which is between Armenia and Azerbaijan. And I was writing, very idealistic young person about what should happen, And every time I'd write a report, I would get told off for being too outspoken, for being too, because Russia was being very oppressive in terms of Chechnya and everything that's happening. And that's what I was putting in my report. I was like, here's the historical precedent. Here's what should happen. And they're like, you can't say that. Russia's on the Security Council. They have veto. And so then I was everywhere going how come Russia can just do this because it's not fair. And I literally got told to pipe down. And I was like, oh, wow, this is politics.
Yeah.
This is politics. This is not what I thought it was. It's not coming in with like, ideals of freedom and justice and integrity and then fighting for that. It's this. It's this maneuvering and this, manipulating and this playing and this. And I was like, eyes wide open very, very quickly. And so I left the UN. I thought I was going to go from internship. And obviously, I worked very hard and I was smart and go into the researcher role and then go, I kind of had planned it out. But then I was like, this is not the path for me. Right. I was very much, and still to this day, very much believe in like truth and, I'm coming from the heart. Like I want to desperately create a better world, and I realized that's not what politics was trying to do.
Yeah.
It was just about kind of, and you see that even here, it's just about these bodies of power and how they shift and move around each other.
Yeah.
And so, because I'd always, even my thesis for both Russian and politics had both been about art and politics. Mm-hmm. And so then I came back to London and I worked for a year, just earning money, odd jobs, secretarial, temping, all that stuff that you do to get money. And then I'd already started doing research into contemporary Ghanaian art. And that's how I was like, that's how I'm going to change things through art, and especially through Ghanaian art. And so, that was just the way. And so then I knew I wanted to do this exhibition on contemporary Ghanaian art. This was 2002, so a long time ago, 21 years ago. At the time, African art was still termed primitive. You wouldn't believe it now, but it was still in the margins. It wasn't showing at the contemporary art spaces. It was always African art is in the margins, and I wanted that to stop. I wanted to be part of stopping that. And so I started doing research. I started asking, I was like, how do I do this in a way that's not superficial, that's deep? And I actually went to see Gus Casey-Hayford, who's Ghanaian, who is now director of the Victoria and Albert Museum East. And he was like, you should do a PhD if you want to do it deeply. And I was like, PhD is going to take me another 3-4 years in university. I don't have time. And so, but then I went to see John Picton, who at the time was the kind of authority on African art. He's white, English, but he'd lived in Nigeria for many, many years. And he's one of those rare white English professors who have the true love. And he, to this day, is probably the best professor I've ever had. I love him. And he put so much care into every single student. He's just amazing. Sure. So I went to see him and he's like, our term is starting, in next week, you should join. And so I did a super quick application. I don't know if it was next week or in a few weeks.
Sure, but it was short.
Yeah, and I joined his master's program.
Wow.
And I loved it. I loved learning. And that was really the beginning of the journey. And while I was doing that, I got this spot to curate the contemporary Ghanaian art show at the Liverpool Biennale. I was the only Black African person there. Liverpool Biennale is the major art event in England. So I started big.
Right.
And I started by building, and this is insane to me now, thinking about how young I was and how ambitious. I built a shrine house, then put the art in there, and I had art and fashion and music and video. It was very interdisciplinary. I mean, basically I started as I've continued.
Right.
But it's crazy to me now looking back at that young girl, and I'm like, wow, you knew. Even though you thought you didn't know what you were doing.
It was intuitive in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
And I kind of want to take her and be like, don't be so scared and nervous. You're there. You're there already. Yeah. Which is what I say to young girls. And when they come to me now, is I can say that to them, even if I couldn't say it to myself back then. And so, it was a lot of years of hustle. And I would say, to a certain extent, I'm still hustling, but the early years were really hard, but so filled with passion, so filled with love and passion of what I was doing. And I wouldn't change that for the world.
Yeah, that's lovely. So now you kind of answered this, but I have to ask why the where. So how did you come to be living, working, playing where you currently are residing in
Accra.
Right? At this particular place.
Phew, that's a journey. So I came back to Ghana. I was always going to come back to Ghana. There was no doubt of that in my mind. You know, my parents had come to Germany, but we were always talking about coming home. Always. Like, there was no, we were here to stay. You know, there was always like, oh, when we go home. Yeah. And my mum actually, when my parents split up, did come back, but I was still there.
Sure.
And she's always like, oh, when are you going to come? And then my mum passed away very suddenly in 2009. And it did something to me. Like, it did something to me spiritually and obviously emotionally and in every way. You know, I was very, very close to my mother. Still am. Mm-hmm. And I did not want to be there anymore. I did not want to be in Europe. I did not want to be amongst white people. Yeah. I did not want to be in a country that was alien to me in every way, even though I knew it. You know, I spent many years there. I was like, I want to be home. Mm-hmm. It was very, very clear. And so I came. And obviously there was the grief of like, why didn't I come when she was still alive and all of this? But it was very clear that I now had to be here. Right. And so I've spent the years kind of building Anno here, building, you know, the ecosystem that I have. And in terms of being here and in Ebury now, like I'd always dreamt as a little girl that I would have a farm on a hill. Like that was something that I have kept diaries since I was like 10, in every diary. And so when I actually got my book deal, and with those of people that know how book deals work in the West, is that they give you an advance, a chunk of money before you write the book, and then you get royalties. And so with that chunk of money, I put deposits on 2 pieces of land. This land in Osu, and then land in Ebury that I'd seen 10 years ago.
And it was still available?
No.
Oh, okay.
I had told my friend, one day I will get this land, but I do not have the money now. Please keep it for me. And he did.
Oh.
The person who I won't say who he is because everybody will rush to him saying, can you do that? He, to his honor, had kept it for me at the same price at which I had first seen it at.
That's friendship.
That is like, for real. Yeah. And so, and he kept asking, you still in? And I'm like, yes, please, you know, it's coming. And so, yeah, that was, it also speaks to the power of holding vision and just holding it. And sometimes you're in a rush. Sometimes you think, oh, I want this thing now. Why is it not coming? But the things that have come to me, like people see, you know, now I would say I have what the world terms as success. Yes. And people see that and they're like, oh, it's because she comes from this family. Oh, it's because she was born in Germany. Oh, it's because she was this. Oh, it's because, you know, people are always trying to find things that they don't have or shortcuts. But dude, I've been doing this 21 years. Yeah. Like that's
in the work.
That's a long time. That's a lifetime's work. Yeah. And I've been doing this with all the sacrifices, personal sacrifices that come. It's not that I just get up and do it. There's like, every day I make a choice to do this. And making a choice to do this often means making a choice to not do that. Sure. And I'm a woman, you know, still that lives and works in a man's world. And the difficulties and the obstacles of that. Notwithstanding, I have a lot of privilege. I acknowledge that, you know, and I'm grateful for it. And I do try in the best way that I can to pass that privilege on, because, you know, I come from a context in which is very differentiated, is very unequal. Yeah. And I'm very, very aware of that. But at the same time, I would say the most important thing is having held a vision. You know, like with the farm on the hill, I've had that vision, you know, for decades and decades and decades and decades. And, you know, when there was no chance even of that vision being reality. And so I would say holding, like when you ask about how I've ended up here, where I am right now, I would say first and foremost, having a vision, knowing what I wanted and get it. I think that's the first step, because a lot of the time we mistake society's messaging for us, for our desires and for our deepest soul desires. And that's not necessarily true. And so I would say getting first and foremost to the truth of who you are and what you want. And that took me many years of finding out who I was underneath all the messaging that I had got from society, from parents, from school, from partners, from all of that stuff, you know, like finding out who I was and what my heart's desire was.
Sure. I love how you said that about the messaging. I think it dovetails well with my next question about Glocal speak.
Yeah.
So we like to hear what you hear. And so I'd like you to share a word, a phrase, or saying that is a meaningful part of your local experience and why or how you come to value it as a Glocal speak. And so that local can be Ghana, but it can also be other places where you have felt local.
I would have said one phrase, ego be, before, which is like this pigeon phrase, but I'm going to say another one, which I think actually might answer the question that you're going to ask next. But so I work with these knowledge keepers here who are incredible, and they're kind of, I originally would have called them traditional priests because I thought that's what they were. They're also artists and musicians. But they said to me when I first started working with them, we didn't have religion traditionally. We had knowledge systems. And so we're not priests, we're knowledge keepers.
Right.
And so that was really fascinating to me. And so I've worked with them for a while. And whenever I speak to this particular knowledge keeper, at the end of our conversation, he always says, free your mind. Free your mind.
I love it.
And so that, like, I hear it in his voice, like, so I'd say I love that.
Yes.
Because it's just such a simple saying, but it says so many things.
Yeah. And he says it in English.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, free your mind.
Yes. Which is lovely. I think that's a mantra, you know, for the world and what we think about.
Yeah.
So before I get to the question you were alluding to, I do want to talk a little bit more about what it's like to be this creative, and particularly on the projects that you've now created through the Institute, which is the Cultural Encyclopedia. And this curation that you've done, because you did the Venice Biennale, you've done I saw you in Dakar, and you've kind of gone around the globe. So how does that become a business?
Okay.
Yeah.
So, I mean, like many others who start off from a creative standpoint, I had no idea what I was doing in terms of management, in terms of finances. And it's a journey that I'm still on. I didn't even know how to manage my own finances. And I've spent many, many, many years working on that and doing like harmful patterns. I've read so many books. I've done so many things like, you know, talk to people.
Advisor.
Yeah, I'm even talking to a woman right now who kind of works on the intersection of women, finance and spirituality. And for me, it's an ongoing journey. Like every kind of work one does on the self, it never really ends. Sure. It just evolves. And so I would say that was the number one step, is looking into myself and just continuously trying to better myself in terms of, you know, knowledge of money and how money works, in terms of knowledge of management. I still feel like that's a really weak point of mine, how to manage people, because as you grow and as your organization grows, you need other people to come on board. At the beginning, you're everything. You're, you know, your PR, your marketing, your finance director, your HR, you're everything. You play all roles. And then at some point that becomes unfeasible as you grow. And so you bring on board other people, and then you have to become a manager of people. I'm an introvert. I at some point I start hating people. Not them themselves, but like, you know, like the noise, you know, the talking, the having to constantly talk and constantly manage. some point I literally like something goes off in my brain where I'm just like, I can't do this. I need to go and lie in a dark room by myself and not speak to anyone for a really long time. And that was the other thing that's now something that I'm coming to peace with, is that I can't actually, like, I am not the best person to manage my organization. That's something that I've come to peace with now, because I just don't have it. There's people who are extroverts and people who enjoy doing that. Like, at some point it makes me want to kill myself, like having to work with people nonstop. And so, I mean, I don't know, like, I still feel like I haven't figured it out, even though from the outside, like I said, it looks like very successful, but maybe that's also life, you feel like you're constantly still, every time you succeed in something, I guess you go on to the next level, and then you have to figure out
what's that
because right now I'm kind of figuring out how to institutionalize and how to create legacy in terms of how does my institution outlive me. And so that's a whole nother level of management, of institution building, of financial, projection,
planning, right.
and all of that. So at every stage, as you're growing and evolving, you're like, oh my God, how do I do this? And so it's a constant process of evolution and growth.
So are you primarily grant funded?
Grants. Yeah, and I don't earn a penny from within Ghana. Never have, really. Yeah. Everything comes from outside.
Yeah.
Which is a crying shame, but it's reality.
Right. So thinking about that, what do you think will change the dial on really, I guess, encouraging and creating a space where the preservation and the observation of arts and history are actually a place where people can earn a living in Africa and Ghana?
From within the continent?
From within.
I mean, the way that the world is set up and has been set up for the last kind of century or so means that it's a hell of a long journey. I mean, it's a really long journey. When I first did the Culture Encyclopedia, I was like, I am only going to fund it with funding from within the continent. That did not happen.
Right.
I think it's a really long journey. And I think that's what I love about feeling in touch with ancestors in this realm of the those who have gone and those who have yet to be born, is that you don't see things in just a short span of your lifetime. You see it as a much bigger thing. And so, that's what I'm saying about legacy, is that I'm building now so that my children, my grandchildren, don't have to do the work that I'm doing now.
Sure.
And so I don't know what I'll see in my lifetime in terms of that, but I'm working so that those that come after me don't have to do the same kind of work that I do.
Sure. So I want to talk a little bit more about your book. So you've always been a writer, you've been in this creative space, filmmaking and of that sort. And now you're a novelist. And so how did that story find you?
It's always been in me.
Okay.
It's always been in me. It's always something that I wanted to do, but I needed a lot of courage. Much more courage than in promoting other people. Like, I feel like that came quite naturally. Maybe as a woman, you are taught in a way to shine your light on others.
Sure.
That's kind of like you're socialized into being the supporting role. So I think, especially as a woman, it takes as a Black woman, it takes a lot of courage because in a way, what you're saying as a novelist is I'm centering my voice. I'm centering the story that I want to tell. And I'm putting myself out on that platform in order to do that. And that is scary as hell.
I can imagine.
And so that took a lot of courage to, think my voice was important enough to work on the craft of writing enough to feel like I mastered the form enough to be able to tell my story. It was a journey, and it still is a journey, but it's a journey that I love very much.
Sure. And so, but the story is something that's to a large degree personal to you in terms of the historical context. So tell us a little bit more about what it was like to, I guess, kind of put yourself out in that space, right? Because it's been in you, obviously, for a long time, but then you've looked at fictionalizing probably some things that were very much part of what your family story is about. And so how in your community do you then now kind of, not how are you seen, but how do you feel like the story has impacted your community in terms of telling that story?
Who do you mean by my
Well,
community?
your Ghanaian community. So your community of family and friends in Ghana.
I mean, it's a fictional story. I don't think that anyone particularly thinks I was writing about them.
Sure.
But I feel like it's a history that is not super well known necessarily. So I guess in that context of, oh, now we have this new knowledge about.
I mean, I feel like I could do better, to be honest. But that's why I do, what drives me is that I constantly feel like I could do better. And that writing a novel is still very much an elitist thing. I'm not going to go into my village in Chebi and everyone's read my novel.
Sure.
Chebi would probably not be happy about me calling it a village. Town. Small town. So that's what I'm kind of trying to figure that out right now, is how do I popularize, or not even popularize, or make more accessible something that's essentially still quite, it's for the educated, cosmopolitan few.
Yeah.
So that's something that I'm still grappling with. That's where film comes in, because, film is everywhere. When you go to the hairdresser, people sitting around the TV in the village, and so that's something that and I know that Ousmane Sembène, for example, the Senegalese filmmaker, the father of African cinema, as he's called, he started off as a novelist and became a filmmaker.
I didn't know that.
Because of that very reason of wanting to reach more people.
Sure.
And so I think it's something that I think about a lot, the two coexisting. I think about making my novel into a film. I think about all of that stuff.
Yeah. And you're working on your next novel?
The next book is a nonfiction book.
Oh, okay. Nonfiction. Okay, interesting. So let's talk about mindset.
Yeah.
And my mindset hack. So we like to get into the minds of our guests. And so I ask you to share your favorite or an innovative mindset hack. So this is one that you practice, one that you know of, or one that you can imagine.
Mindset hack. Okay, I think that's where the free your mind thing was connected to. I think that's probably the mindset hack, I would say, the most. And also, I've just kind of connected with this spiritual teacher in Portugal, Muji. He's Jamaican, Jamaican Japanese.
Oh, Muji.
Yeah.
Oh, he's based in Portugal.
Yeah. You know him?
Yeah. I watch his YouTube.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So I did not know of him before I moved there. Okay. I mean, not before I moved there, before I went there to write. And I'm very grateful to connect with him.
Yeah.
And he has this beautiful mindset hack of, how do I say this in a way that doesn't, he's so eloquent about this, and I want to honor that eloquence. He says, become the observer. So it's like, as you're speaking and going about your day, you step out of yourself and in a way become the observer. And by becoming the observer, you kind of come more into a place of being rather than of the person doing. It's like you watch the self, the created self. Yeah. And that's something that I'm trying to do more and more as a kind of hack, I guess.
Yeah,
is
it absolutely
if I'm in moments, if I'm feeling upset or something happens, I just kind of go out of that.
Yeah.
And I observe, I become the observer. And that for me is the most beautiful mindset.
I love the spiritual folks that kind of go into that place of, because what that speaks to me is a little bit about the astral, kind of astrally elevating yourself to take yourself away. Some of that is traveling to other places, mentally and spiritually, but the idea of, just coming out of it to then have a more crisp understanding of what that existence is. Yeah,
and it also allows you to come out of your own subjective small world in a way and connect with the
bigger picture.
Yeah.
I like that. Thank you for that one. So we've talked about a great amount of things, and so I like to find out who my guests are when they're not working. We're not doing the things that kind of are about the economics of life. And so would you consider yourself a reader, a watcher, or a listener? And what are some of your favorite reads, watches, or listens, or other ways that you spend your time off the clock, so to speak?
I'm kind of all three.
Most creatives are.
Yeah.
So
I don't know if I could pick one. Yeah, I'm all three.
Okay. So what are some of your favorite watches lately?
I loved the film Past Lives.
Oh, okay.
I think her name is Celine Song, the filmmaker. It's her first feature film. And it's so beautiful. I went to London recently for a few days for work, and I did something that I used to do a lot as a student, which I hadn't done for a really long time, which is I took myself on a date to the cinema.
Lovely.
And I have this one favorite cinema in London, which is called the Renoir. It's like an art house cinema in Russell Square. And I took myself on a date in the like late afternoon. I'd been in the British Library all day doing research. And I finished the day. It was like a really old school day. Like, you know, I was like, oh, I feel young and free again. And so after spending the day at the British Library, I went to the cinema, and I kind of had a ramen opposite beforehand. It was like, so, and I did all this by myself. And that's what I used to do when I was studying.
Nice.
Is that I used to get, because you can get a student ticket, and I'd go in the middle of the day after lectures, like, you know, spend a few hours in the library and then go and watch something, because films are my passion. And so I went to watch Past Lives, and it's such a beautiful film. It's about, there's a phrase that they use that comes from Korea. I can't remember what it is, but it's like about two people meant to be together in this lifetime because they've spent many, many, many past lifetimes being together, so that they know when they meet in this lifetime that this is it. That this is the person that they're meant to be together.
Interesting.
And so it was kind of about that. It was about fate and love and grief, and who you stay with and who you leave behind. And it was just done in such a poetic, sad, but joyful way. It was such a lovely dissection of love. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But in not the kind of small ways that we know of in lots of American movies, but in this really elevated way. It was amazing. I loved it.
Nice. And so, you know, you saying that, I think I remember seeing you were working on a work about beauty.
Oh, yeah.
So asking people about beauty. And so it just kind of brings to mind the question is, what in that work, because I look at space, and a lot of your work deals with the built environment and how things look. And so where I feel that there's a bit of luxury in the idea of beauty sometimes in the way that Africans visualize their space. Because when I go to other countries and I see like the natural nature, obviously it's so beautiful. But when I ask a everyday Ghanaian many times, what is beauty? They can't answer. And part of it is probably the language, but what is it that, and so I kind of translate it into what is it that makes you feel transported somehow, right? And so I'm curious about what you found in that project and asking people that question.
You mean when we went around asking people about culture?
I'm not sure if it's culture. I just remember seeing you were asking, you asked them specifically about culture, or the question is, what is culture? Okay. And so what did you find with that word?
Oh, so many different responses, which was incredible. So many different, and everyone had an answer. And, you know, from fishermen to kids to teachers to, I mean, we've done a little documentary about it. Yeah. It was so varied and beautiful, actually.
Sure. I can imagine. And I think maybe what I was complaining at what I would have asked is, what is beauty?
Yeah.
Because I'm so curious, because there's so much beauty that we could have, but we just don't seem to recognize or want to aspire to it. And so if you were to sum up what you observed in that piece, and I will put a link to the documentary, is it available publicly now?
I think so,
yeah. What would you say that was the not the typical, but the most prevalent answer that people gave?
That it had to do with lived experience. You know, it was not something that was in a museum or in a glass case, or it was very much to do with lived experience, with like memory, with what people saw, what people experienced. It was very much part of people's lives.
Sure. Well, on that note, I'm going to leave us here because I know you have many things to do to kind of get yourself ready for the next phase of your day and moving. I really appreciate you taking time
Thank
I
you.
so appreciate it. I enjoy spending time in your space because it's lovely.
Thank you.
And so before we go, do you have any last thoughts you would like to share with our audience?
I think we've kind of covered quite a lot. So just, thank you also for your time and for the conversation.
Okay, wonderful. All right, Glocal citizens, this has been another episode of the podcast. You can catch us Tuesdays with new episodes at glocalcitizenspod.com or wherever you get your podcasts. Like, share, subscribe, leave us a review. We love people to know about great content online. So Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon, wherever, leave us a review. We appreciate it. Until next time, bye for now.